So welcome, Tyson. And just before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the sovereign people of the unceded lands on which we both live and work, and would like to acknowledge all elders, past, present, and thank them for their wisdom and deep connection to the lands and waters. So also would like to acknowledge all First Nation peoples in the audience. And just as a quick introduction before Tyson jumps in, Tyson Yunkaporta is an academic, an arts critic, a researcher who belongs to the Appalachian clan in far north Queensland. And he carves traditional tools and weapons, and also works as a senior lecturer in Indigenous knowledges at Deakin University in Melbourne. So he's the author of Sand Talk, which is on the reading list for the Locative Media Oceania course, a text which has had a huge impact around the world, and I think on your schedule too, Tyson. So thank you so much for joining us for the Locative Media course. It's wonderful to have you. I'm really excited about the conversation. So I'd like to adopt the beautiful invitation that you gave to Milani Goodchild in a recent podcast. And just by starting, can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do in whatever language feels comfortable for you?
Oh, okay. I'm not going to talk language. Now I don't think. Yeah, just because I don't know who the audience is yet. But yeah. Well, I'm just a shout out to Bunurong country, who's hosting me right now where I'm staying, a long way from home. So it's I do appreciate the hospitality and the way some people will bring you into country here. It's it's really good. Yeah. And I guess I don't know. I won't acknowledge it. Our elders' special connection to land and special connection to country, and special relationship, with community and country, because I don't think that is special. I think that's just normal. The idea of making it special means that it's not something that humans will be able to return to, industrialized modern humans. Mm-hmm. And I think it's getting a bit urgent now.
Yeah.
We've probably got a few decades for us all to return to that normal connection to the land.
Yeah.
And if we don't, it's the land will be fine. It will change, but it'll move on to a different custodial species, and we'll lose that right. So yeah, we got to bring everybody back under that law of the land, and we've got to do that soon. I don't think you get there by being special or by so I can't say to people, I'm special because, I've got a special connection. I've got special knowledge. I keep trying to make it clear to people that I'm just like a small boy in my culture. I've got very little influence, very little status, and I'm very happy with that. And just the few small things that I can share from that young boy's perspective, it's probably a good place for a lot of people to start.
Yeah.
In I don't know. See, it's not a matter of learning Indigenous people's culture, but it's about being in dialogue to find those processes whereby you can see those fragments, those patterns of creation in yourself, and find your own door through to a return, to a right of return, to a dynamic landscape, which is our habitat, which is, our ecological niches are in there, and we need to be in there because the land needs us.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as wilderness. If there's no human hand or foot in a place, then that place is sick. It needs us there. We're supposed to be there. And and I think we will all return to that. There's just a few things standing in the way, like, I don't know, land as capital is is a bit of a barrier. So there's a few things, I don't know, they're just small things upon which the entire global financial system is currently resting. So I guess we'll see how it works out in the next couple of decades.
I think that's a really great point to, I guess, jump straight into, I guess, the theme of the Locative Media Oceania program, which is the meeting of the waters. And that was very much inspired by the thought that water is connected. It connects through salt water, fresh water. In regards to the Murray-Darling Basin, it connects cultures, and it's one of the most commodified water tracks in the world, maybe. And I really love to, I guess, riff on that with you about thinking about that as a living.
Well, it's not only the water itself as a substance, and people look to that and kind of, people build abstractions into the stack, the evolutionary stack that don't need to be there. And this concept of water as this, substance, of spirit and communication. Yeah, that's true. But that the abstraction of water is, not all of it. Water doesn't have to be present to be shaping the landscape and the way you move on it. It's what water might do if water was there, So if it rained suddenly really fast, where would the water go in that dry country where you're standing? And that tells you where you go, if you know what I mean, how you move across it. So it's always water, and, as people are fond of saying, our bodies are mostly made of water. Yeah, that's true. But, so, it would make sense then to move in the landscape as water moves, but not just following the actual water, but where water might go if it was there when water is absent,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you make a great point. There was something that you wrote in your book about the insects responding, and how, that when in the presence of water, other species come alive and tell you about the eminence of that water or the emergence of that water's coming, which I thought was very evocative.
Well, look, and it's a transferable skill set. It's a transferable methodology almost to any domain you might want to look at, to any landscape that's sort of mapped over this one temporarily. So, your economic system, you can navigate that in the same way, because currency, it's a current, it's a flow, and it's a flow of value within relationships that are formed by exchange, and so if you start to understand that as a flow and you move within those relationships, those currents of exchange and value and strengthening relations, if you're moving in your economy in that way, you find that you'll find rich areas of water that you might not have otherwise found. But also, as you're moving that way and other people are moving that way with you, that you're actually slowly and marginally transforming that economic landscape as well, and it's kind of, that's the way you foster emergence. And that's really the only way that emergence is what we need, rather than change, rather than revolution. I mean, you can do direct interventions into things, but if you do that, you don't know what you're doing. You might think there's a solution and you might campaign for that, and then off you go. But then there are always externalities that are detonated elsewhere, not in your beautiful, safe space. So it's about, water shows you how to foster the conditions for emergence in a complex adaptive system. And an economy, even, if it is stifled a lot by monopolies and all kinds of other things, financial instruments and layers of derivatives, etc., in the end, the real economy is that human economy of exchange and relationships. And, if you're moving within that, then you're fostering the conditions for emergence and systemic emergence. And that's what makes really like proper, good, lasting, sustainable change.
Yeah, I'm just thinking as you're talking about, talking about emergence, and I know that you've spoken with Nora Bateson in the past, and she talks about pre-emergence, which I thought was a really beautiful concept. And for me, how I understood that is how you tend the soil, like how you actually prepare for that emergence to come. So when it does come, it's actually taking root in something that's solid and will foster and grow. So I sort of, I'm sort of feeling this sense of this emergence that's coming. It's also the pre-emergence that leads to that. But I think what you're calling to, that we need to add, this need to move and shift how we see ourselves as part of a system and part of, of the ecology, not as this human controller species.
Yeah.
It's that shift that's that emergence and preeminence.
Well, emergence is not a linear process either, in the same way that, water cycles are not linear. What part of the water cycle is pre-emergence and which is emergence? It all is. Is it the evaporation? Is it the condensation? Is it the precipitation? Is it the flow of the water on the landscape? It's all of these things.
Yeah.
It's all of these things and more, and it's constantly in motion in very dynamic systems. And I guess if you're outcomes oriented, then you're like, oh, we need to end this drought, so we've got to do some, I don't know, cloud seeding with silver oxide or something up there immediately, or we need to charge all those particles in the ionosphere and try and bring some clouds. I guess if you are goal oriented and you've got KPIs for how much rainfall you need, then it's it's not emergence, it's tinkering. It's the difference between complex and complicated. Complicated tinkered systems, they need constant maintenance. So
I think I heard a radio recording where you spoke about cloud seeding, and because I'm from Queensland originally as well, I remember that being thought of as something that was almost a sensible idea, and it was you are sort of really pointed to the fact how poisonous it is, and like you say, it's just a tinkering.
Yeah, well, once you intervene, and I mean there are knock-on effects then, there are always, butterfly effects going on. There's always entropy that you're outsourcing elsewhere, in order to achieve some act of creation in one place. If you're trying to intervene in a system from outside of that system, that's what you get. And it's always a disaster. Always, even if you're not just sort of measuring toxicity levels and seeing where that goes or whatever, which is almost impossible in the systems of skies and water, that are happening over such a large area. You can't measure that, and the effect is cumulative over time. The other thing is that once you intervene directly in a system in those linear ways, you have to then keep doing that because you've changed the system, and the system is now dependent on your intervention. So it's just another bloody thing that you got to keep up. So I mean, they're talking about different. Well, we could explode a bunch of missiles, full of particles up in the ionosphere and create a shield, to reduce global warming.
Yeah,
that's awesome. However, you have to keep that up then, and you have to keep that up forever, because then the day that stops, you haven't got a gradual frog in the boiling water effect happening. It's overnight, So that one time that you can't get that done, like if you start to run out of the materials for rockets, for example, in 50 years or a century, if you can't make that happen anymore, then all of a sudden, then you've got problems. And those problems are sudden. And you haven't been able to respond to the gradual temperature shift and make your communities mobile and adapt to that change. These changes need to happen gradually in order for us to adapt properly to it. If it happens overnight, then that's a even bigger extinction event, that one.
Actually, this is just random, and like I've got notes, but this is a random thought, being from Queensland and thinking about adaptation, with cane toads. Like I remember when they were heading up and over to Kakadu and the sort of, I guess, people's fear about that happening. But
Mm.
I mean, there's still a big problem, but there's been this adaptation where certain species now can actually attack the cane toad and safely
Yeah.
eat their innards, you know. So
Yeah, they've learned how to flip them over, etc. So there's this co-evolution going on because the cane toads themselves are changing too. The old fellows, I'm sure that'll come out in a scientific study eventually, but the old fellows have been telling me this for years because they have story now.
wow.
Just as water buffalo has dreaming there, now the cane toads also have dreaming, and
Yeah.
there's story for them being that their dreaming is about the cleaning up of toxins produced by industrialization, because they have those poison sacs, on their
Yeah.
back. There's that, they have that function of, that's the dreaming for poison and
Oh, wow.
toxicity,
Yeah.
and these were things that were like, poisoning water holes, poisoning all different kinds of animals until they came into that dreaming. And then, the entire system shifted, in that story, with that.
Yeah.
And old fellows say that they're walking differently now, and that there's changes happening in the physiology of the toe in that
Oh,
place.
wow. Yeah.
So it's come in that way. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I hadn't even thought about that, because I often just think of them as just being so devastating,
Mm.
and well, I was so happy to hear, and I can't even remember what it was. Is it a quokka, or I can't remember what species were flipping them over, as you were saying.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep. It's huge, isn't it?
yeah,
But then there's, but this is the thing, when every ecosystem on the planet moves at least 100 meters a year. These things are mobile.
yeah,
Systems are mobile. And the species within those are mobile, and you have exchange across between bioregions and systems, all the time. You also have migrations,
yeah,
happening periodically of different species, coming in and coming out of places. You have migrations of people, different kinds of people happening. And this is a normal part of creation. This is what creation is supposed to do. There aren't these static, fixed wildernesses where, well, that is where the zebras are,
yeah,
and that's it. It
yeah,
doesn't work like that. There are always migrations, and there are always gradual shifts happening in the landscape in that way. And so,
yeah,
we're supposed to move and adapt with those. That gradually over time, our seasonal estates, in our camps in various places where we go at different seasons, those gradually shift as well. Even stories over deep time, as landforms shift, they change.
mm,
So if you go to, you're from Queensland, so Cairns, and you go up the hill there, in the rainforest, you go up in the tableland, all that country is new country. That's only 10,000 years ago or so.
yeah,
It wasn't rainforest before that, but there were the big volcanic eruptions that completely changed the landscape. New landforms, an entirely new different ecosystem, a new microclimate of rainforest there. That's new country.
yeah,
And all of those landforms have story, because the story shifts as well. The culture shifts, the
mm,
language changes, people coming in, different language, different people, and then that adapts to the landscape. You see that dreaming emerge from that place, like in real time, That
mm.
feels like real time. 10,000 years feels like in real time for if you got that deep time perspective, but you can still see that place in motion,
Yeah, yeah. I
Mm.
mean, that's so interesting. I know that a geomorphal. Oh, I can't even think of what he is now. He's a geologist, but he studies morphologies, like
Yeah.
yeah. I can't think of it. But anyway, he had been doing some work with the Clarence River, and he actually saw these changes that had happened in the pathway of the river, and they perfectly align with dreaming stories
Mm.
of a witch that was that basically, I don't know the story, but it echoed what he learnt about the actual shifts in the pathway of the water itself. And
That's it.
I find that really fascinating, and that this continuation of a knowledge of a place too. You know, it's living and vibrant, like that. That there's now stories about the cane toad. You know, go figure.
Yeah.
You know, so, and the fact that they could even represent something that you know, has a bigger meaning. You know, talking about poison and the, you know, the relationship of that to different moments in history and post invasion is really powerful, I think.
That's it.
Yeah, and I just, in terms of thinking about time and memory, I picked up that you'd written a paper with researcher from Monash where there'd been a study done with some medical students. I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
That was like 3 years ago. Nobody was interested at the time. We couldn't get funding for it, you know, so we ended up just doing it on the cheap, the study, which limited what we could do, which is a bit annoying because we would have liked to have scaled it up a bit more. So, you know, and then we had a ceiling effect because, you know, they were med students who were really good at memorizing stuff, and we didn't give them a big enough list of things to memorize. So the differences that we were measuring were minuscule, you know. So this frustrating ceiling effect, and we just didn't have the resources to run the experiment again. But there was enough there to, you know, suggest that it would deserve further study. Probably not enough to support the culture war bait headlines that have come with it. You know, ancient Aboriginal memorization technique defeats the ancient Greeks. And,
that was exactly,
you know, superior to the Western memorization technique. I was like, oh my God, put my name on that. They're going to come for me. I'll get shot here.
I noticed,
and it's quite, you know, I mean, you know, any decent scientist will go through and say, well, there are indications that this would be worth further study, but, you know, don't go making those kind of claims. But Newcastle Uni wants to repeat it and see if they can replicate the results, but also with imaging, neural imaging as well, so that we can have pictures of what the brain activity is in, you know, an indigenous memorization technique that is that's drawing on the practice of you know, working with songlines and just place-based knowledge and story, so that you have that narrative that's in a place that you know, and the knowledge is being mapped through story in a location. You know, it's not that much different from the memory palace and a lot of the different. It's, you know, there are different Western techniques and modern techniques that employ different parts of that, but I'm not sure that I know of any that combine all those things together in the same way. You know, also with some sort of oral culture, sort of language tricks in there as well. You know, of repetition and rhyme and things like that, you know, to jog memory. These are human things. It's not like just, oh, this is an ancient Aboriginal thing, because at the same time, you know, I don't know, but 10,000 years ago when we were doing it, you know, and for a long time before that, but, you know, when we're doing it 10,000 years ago, I mean, your ancestors were doing it too, like wherever they were in the world, you know, because everybody was grounded in place, that story on those maps of place. And your knowledge sort of went in this sort of living mnemonic, you know, of your existence in place and story, you know. So it's, you know, it's a human thing.
Yeah. I like the fact that, about your comments about the headlines, because it was exactly that about, ancient Greece. And,
it's going all over the place.
Yeah.
It's weird. I thought there'd be more backlash. To it than that. But then somebody shows me that, like Jordan Peterson tweeted about it.
Yeah.
Is it Jordan Peterson? You know, the Canadian guy, clean your room. that like everybody's cancelling because he's, you know, I
Oh,
don't know, he's not woke enough or whatever.
oh,
Is it
okay. It's
Peterson?
not
Yeah.
woken
Anyway,
up. I don't know.
yeah. Well, everybody like, I mean, he's like the devil for most of the left around the world. So, and you know, usually I don't know. I figure he'd usually jump on something like that and
Yeah.
get all culture war and come down on it. But he was tweeting positively about it.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. You know, so it's like, okay, well, if he didn't bite, then you know, maybe I've dodged a bullet.
Yeah. Well,
I
I
don't want to
found
be the
that.
start of another culture war. I'm
No,
sick of them. I don't want to be at the center of one. Jesus,
no, just to the
get me
side
out
of
of it.
it, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because it was one of my colleagues who's in Europe who shared the paper with me, and
Mm,
you know, one of the other organisers of our event, and he was like, "Oh, ask Tyson, you know, about the relationship of, you know, sort of place-based memory work and
mm,
locative media." And
mm.
my mind initially was like, "This is locative media," um,
Yeah,
you know. So
yeah.
I'd
If
love
we're
to.
yarning and we've got story, then the things are in place, and you have to have place in that story, or it's not proper story. You know,
Mm,
and that's just how it goes. But that's your existence. Like you're biologically hardwired. It's patterned in you as an organism to think that way. I mean,
mm,
we're talking about, you know, the destruction of, you know, global biodiversity and our habitats and our land base that keeps us alive, and how this is a problem for, you know, our ongoing nutrition and stuff like that. But it's also your cognition
mm.
needs that diet too. Your cognition can't work without a landscape, a
Yeah.
living landscape that you're inhabiting. You know, it just doesn't work properly. And, you know, people are really struggling with a lot of depression and all kinds of things. And, you know, perhaps a contributing factor is just the fact that we're not able to employ that navigational memory, you know, complex as much anymore, and not in real deep and meaningful ways.
Yeah.
If you do that, you lose meaning as an organism. You're just you know, you're a chimp in a cage. What are you going to do? You're going to just slowly die. Yeah,
Yes.
it's a terrible thing. But you know, I believe we can all come back to this. It's not hard. I mean, if you see, you know, like medical students are. I mean, they're people who've sort of been really broken and twisted and domesticated into the kind of thinking that's needed to do well on exams. You know, for like a couple of decades, the poor bastards, and and they're all there just trying to memorize everything they need to memorize to become a doctor. You know, but it took them 20 minutes to come back into this way of thinking, and you could see them being energized about it, and then trying to describe what it was they were going through. And you know, it was something special where they couldn't put their finger on it. And so that's why we did a qualitative part of the study too, to try and capture that, but it didn't quite. But we did heaps of projects like that. So we did the cranial nerve complex, we did the citric acid cycle, we did bones, you know, memorizing bones and anatomy, and these were all mapped onto locations on the campuses around the place there. And it was really cool, but nobody was interested in that. It was kind of looked at like, you know, I was kind of, they were like, you know, Tyson, you're supposed to be teaching the students about white guilt and explaining their privilege to them and how damaging it is, and, you know, and making them culturally aware and culturally sensitive. Like that was what I was supposed to be doing. But I was like, well, no, you know, that how will they value a culture they don't know anything about? And
Yeah.
you know, I've got to reach out first. I've got to offer them something from the culture that's going to be of use to them. And if it's something that's going to help them ace their exams, and if while they're learning about Aboriginal culture, they're also memorizing, you know, all the cranial nerves and their functions, then yeah, they're going to come to it favorably. They're going to have a high opinion of Aboriginal culture, and from there they can come into their relation and then choose that. I'm not going to preach to them, tell them that they have to, you know, I don't know, try and shame them into cultural humility or something. like that's going to get better outcomes for our people. You know, I haven't seen that link proven yet. I can see correlations, but I can't see causation there proven yet. So, you know, until then, let's try something more rigorous.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I didn't keep that job for long, and I finished up a deacon, you know, which, I don't know, people at the time told me that, you know, it was like, I don't know, it didn't have as much of a reputation as, you know, your bigger unis, you know, you Melbourne Uni and RMIT and, you know, Monash, it sort of like they all look down on Deakin like it's a TAFE or something. So, but I'm really glad I finished up there because they really are into that holistic, you know, systems thinking, you know, and that complexity lens that can come with Indigenous knowledge. And so they've supported me to start up an Indigenous knowledge systems lab that looks at the world's problems, you know, through an Indigenous lens and looks at proposing solutions that are, you know, quite unlike any others, you know, because
Yeah.
we can like look at where, say in climate change, where there's a feedback loop and then understand that system and think about how you intervene within that system in order to, you know, redirect that feedback loop, you know, into something that's going to sustain the system rather than destroy it. You know, that's the kind of potential that our knowledge has. So, you know, why not take a look at it? I don't know. I might be wrong though. So,
Look, I'd love to hear more about the research centre because it just sounds really fascinating and really relevant. I mean, I'm at University of Canberra, and I think that they've actually done some good things in trying to bring that sort of more of a systems approach and inclusive way of thinking into the pictures. So, yeah, I'd love to hear more about what you're doing with the
yeah,
research centre. I know that you're at the
yeah.
same time you're babysitting. So.
Oh, I am at the same time. That's true, but that's my life now. That's been my life for over a year. 75% of my work is domestic labor now, unpaid domestic labor. So, but I tell you, there's at least half your audience would be quite insulted if I complained about that. That's
Yeah.
yeah, but I don't know. It is my most important work is in this house here, and it's with these babies, and that's 75% of my time is that, and then I put another 25% into my work and research and you know, writing and doing these kind of things. Yeah. So that but I still get about 3 or 4 hours sleep a day, so that's all right. Sometimes, not today. Well, I've got a meeting with Anwar Ibrahim tonight. He's that fella, yeah, and I think the Bolivian minister of something. I can't remember. So I'm like meeting people like this all the time,
Yeah.
like interesting outsiders from around the world, and, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I totally can get that though, because you know, people, the community of locative media, people that I've been linking into, I mean, everyone knows about your work, you know, so I think that, you know, your book is really, I think, hit a deep response, you know, and when I read it, what I really loved about it was how you had different levels of the way you spoke about things. Like you start with talking about like the circle and a dot, and it was something that tied to the carving, you know, and my background's in art, so I really responded to that. And then you shift it into, you know, one of the elders talking about something, and then you shift it into this real theory, you know, really engaging with the whole sort of canon of theory. And I just sort of really loved it because of that. It was like operating at all these levels, and it was actually in a way talking about the systems that we need to talk about, you know, because they operate at all these levels and they interconnect and they cross over. So
yeah.
Well,
it's just, I mean, you know, it just shows you how startling emergence is, you know, because I did not, I didn't expect that there would be an emergent niche that would even understand what the hell I was talking about. I thought, well, that's 10 years down the track that there's a critical mass of people who even know what I'm talking about, to make this book remotely useful, But I only wrote it because they offered me a $5,000 advance and I really need a $5,000. Right. Yeah, I just crashed the car and we were in just deep. I mean, I was looking down the barrel of being homeless, within a few months. And so that $5,000 was really handy. So I'd like dashed it out in a couple of weeks and sent it off. And I thought, maybe like 50, 100, maybe a couple of thousand people might read it, But, you underestimate the power of emergence. It's it just hit the market at a time of crisis erupting. A lot of people were like, the big criticism of the book that I was getting in the early days was, it's a bit pessimistic. I don't think we're going to be running into problems like that for another century or two. I don't want you to, you know what I mean? But then all of a sudden it was like this rolling meta crisis globally, and people were reading it and they found it optimistic. All of a sudden, the book, and there was a critical mass of people, who've been thinking around this stuff for decades and yarning, and suddenly they're, it was just at a time when there was this sort of catalyzing action of all these people really coming together around different texts and ideas and groups, and so it's not really a zeitgeist. And the book's not this huge success or anything, but it's just resonating in certain little niches, around the world where there's a critical mass of people thinking in this way and interested in, as you are, in haptic sort of cognition and embodiment, and and people just longing for a right of return. I don't know if I'm allowed to. So that might be a bit of a appropriation there. I don't know if I should say that. I might offend Israelis or something, but that idea of a right of return, though, I really like that, about that homeland, how they sort of go, well, all Jewish people have a right of return. And I think in the same way, like all human beings really should have a right of return to come back into their habitat, to come back into their landscape that's been stolen from all of us, just in a relatively short time, a century or two, especially just the last century. Like a century ago, most people were still living in relation to the land. Most people on the planet. Now, most of us have no access to those landscapes because those landscapes are somebody else's capital.
Yeah,
and we're not welcome on it because capital's only worth something. It can only be priced if it's limitable and excludable.
Yeah.
So it has to be limited. It has to be, people have to be excluded from that landscape in order for it to be worth anything, in order for it to be priced and then leveraged, borrowed against. And then with those derivatives sort of endlessly speculated on. All these new, I was talking about those layers of abstraction.
Yeah.
A lot of those are financial layers. And that finance is a very recent thing. And it's not a good thing. And it's one of those things that if people can start to see it, then they'll start to see that, hang on, all these things that have happened to Indigenous people around the world, that's going to happen to us now.
Yeah.
We're all going to become, the source of extraction and, genocide and everything else. This is not good. We're kind of in the same boat now. And, some people have been through that and have a roadmap. And your refugees and kind of mobile populations and displaced populations globally, which is millions of people, maybe billions, these people have expertise in how to be mobile and how to attempt some kind of, survival or thriving, with very little at all, and being able to be mobile, being able to be adaptive. How do you maintain family relations and strong bonds? How do you maintain community? How do you
Yeah.
scale that and then map that, like transfer that as that population must move? And as that population is fragmented, how do you maintain those relations? And, so you see economies emerge out of that, like, the remittance economy. Have you come across that one? So that's where, people who have to travel abroad to work, like, from the Philippines and go and work for minimum wage somewhere, less than minimum wage somewhere else. People who have to like sell themselves as slaves around the world, they sell back, they send a little bit back home, and that's what's keeping their family alive. And that became the most resilient economy on the planet. So at the time of the global financial crisis, when every economy was taking a big hit, the remittance economy was the only one that didn't.
Wow.
And so people were looking to that and going, what's the secret of the remittance economy? We need to, we need to learn from that. But they didn't do that in the end. They just went, okay, how can we extract from this? So they found ways to limit it and tax it and add some different fees and like basically skim even more off the top of these people who had nothing, but those people and those kinds of economies and like very resilient economies and adaptive systems of flows of relations that emerge, these are the communities that people need to be talking to, not like, oh, poor thing, let me help you. Poor thing, what can I do to be really generous and, get my philanthropic buzz on? It's kind of like, hey, hey, Ahmed, help me, help us out here. How are you maintaining like such a vibrant culture and you're still healthy and you're thriving? How did you do that? How did you survive this? What are your systems? How is your community still so strong? How have you been able to transplant that and then still thrive here? We need to be in dialogue, all of us, around that sort of stuff.
I'm thinking, this is on the tangent, but I spent some time in Algeria and I was blown away, that there was some, sort of very economically, poor communities, but everyone had a mobile, everyone had a satellite dish, and that whole idea of bunny hopping, which I think was that concept that was a big thing maybe 10 or 15 years ago, where people were getting internet access through that linking up of technology. So
that's it.
So much innovation happens in that space.
That's it. And this produces things that are really replicable, applicable, and that are potentially disruptive innovations, potentially really helpful. And you find it in late adopter communities, people who, skip the steam engine and the fax machine, skip all that, and then they're suddenly just setting up, these ingenious systems of bloody, abandoned solar panels and bits of sort of copper that are managing to power an entire community, and they've got a grid where they're all sharing power, and that's going around in a way that sort of mirrors their economy. The internal local economy, it mirrors that system of flows, which in turn is based on the system of flows of their landscape and their place. So you can see that stack, replicating through. The problem with the stack of the, industrialized cultures in first world, the problem with that stack is that they don't match up. They don't follow the same patterns. The layers of this false stack do not, they don't mirror each other. They don't follow the same patterns of creation, and they certainly don't follow the patterns of the land or the cultures and languages of the people of the land. So, but you see in late adopter communities that you see this genius just sort of coming up from the bottom of the stack, from that rhizomatic strong base, which is kind of cool.
It is cool. And I just was thinking too, you're talking about feedback loops and how ecologies have feedback loops and cycles. And capitalism, there's no feedback loop. So, you know, the idea is profit, 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 you know, and it's
Mm.
always about ever increasing
Yeah.
profit. So, you know,
Well,
it's
there are
wonderful
feedback
that
loops
man.
because it's a dynamic self-organizing system now. That system of capital. You know, so there are feedback loops in them, but they're destructive.
Yeah.
But in terms of the ecological loops, like what they might call closed loops,
Mm.
you know, where nothing's created or destroyed, but things are recycled through. So
Mm.
that one system's entropy is another system's lunch, and things just keep, you know. So when a tree falls in the forest and brings down other trees, it's like all of that is used by the system, you know, and fits in the system, and it recycles back through, etc. But yeah, so those closed loops, you know, they're not feedback loops necessarily, but they're closed loops. You know, what the wrong sort of feedback loops of your you know, modern economic system does, it opens those closed loops. So it's extracting, so there's a mouth at one end and an ass at the other, you know. It's extracting here and it's dumping there. And, you know, so basically what it's extracting, you know, all the value that it extracts, it accumulates and piles up in one place. So there aren't flows of that value and energy and information throughout the system. That's stifled. So the system stagnates, your natural system anyway. And then, you know, you also get static heaps of entropy at the other end, at the arse end. That's in those open loops. So that's a system that is not, you know, while it might be extracting from the natural system, you know, from the system of land and dumping on it as well, that's its only connection to it. It doesn't mirror any other action in the ecosystem. It's kind of like a parasitic self-organizing system that sort of laid itself on top of the landscape. You know, and it's not, I don't know, it's not just a couple of evil people doing it. It's not like, oh, if we could just convince those in power, blah, 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 or, you know, it's not even a collective demotic thing whereby if we could just shift people's attitudes or just raise awareness about this, then it would change. Yeah, that's not it. It's a self-organizing system now. It's got its own momentum. It's practically sentient, you know, because you see the way it jujitsus its way around any threat to it. It just has this amazing way of absorbing any movement that is a threat to it. Like it just absorbs it and welcomes it in, and then rebadges it, rebrands it, like, you know, keeps the name, but pretty much bends it around to the in service of liberalism, and off we go again. Liberalism itself, it's like, you know, the idea of liberation, the idea of liberal, it, you know, was supposed to mean freedom, you know, and it even co-opted that and turned it to the service of the system. It's the freedom of these corporations, these weird entities. It's the freedom of them to be able to do a lot of damage and not be accountable for it, to outsource that accountability elsewhere, even outsource the damage, you know, to places further afield from the little technocratic utopian bubbles of privilege that sort of exist in the world for a tiny minority of people.
Yeah, and I was listening today to your conversation on Into the Wild, I think, and about rebranding, and what you're saying now is just reminding me of some of the things that you were saying in that interview, which I thought were really powerful too, because you know, it is that thing about how things are rebranded and co-opted, you know, and even the concept of nature, organics, all these things are, again, they're things that have been, you know, sort of the meaning of them has got multiplicities, but it's like organics is a brand, you know, and it's not organic, you know.
That's it. Hey, can you pause for a sec? I've got a number 2 emergency to deal with.
Okay. No worries.
This little girl, I'll be like less than a minute.
Okay, no worries.
I'm lightning quick with this caca.
Cool.
Clean up now. Sweet.
Cool. Yeah, can you talk to me a little bit about what your plans are for the research centre? Because I think, you know, that I would love to come and do some research there. I mean, how are you seeing this as an organisation and the work ahead for what you want to do?
Well, the idea of it is about indigenous people who, work with indigenous knowledge systems. It's about pretty much creating a new industry of indigenous knowledge systems thinkers, who are able to apply indigenous knowledge processes, not just indigenous knowledge content and facts and, bits and pieces like that. Like that's good, but that's an industry that's already there. I'm trying to kickstart a new industry, whereby indigenous people are able to apply our traditional methods of inquiry to solving, some of the world's more wicked problems. So I really want to establish that as a indigenous-led project, and a strong indigenous industry, pretty much. That's able to, provide respect and a, income stream and, a place, for indigenous people, to be able to work with that knowledge. I don't know. I don't know if it'll work. I'm trying really hard. I just I don't want government funding. I want private funding. I want private donors, and I want donors who will keep, who aren't going to be demanding a quarterly report I got to flog myself for either.
Yeah.
It's just like, well, here's what we're doing before we have any funding. Here's what we're doing already, which is delivering a hell of a lot more than, a lot of other things with multi-million-dollar funding are delivering. Here's what we're already doing. This is the minimum standard. If you want to see more of that, then, chuck some money at us so we can grow the team. So, we're still in that phase of getting more funding. We've been really fortunate enough to get a heap of seed funding, in order to buy out time for a couple of members of the team and start to grow it a little bit. But it's early days yet. It has to be emergent, and that's a problem with getting funding because, they keep saying, well, show me a map of exactly what you're going to do every month for the next 5 years. And I'm like, I don't know. And if I did suddenly know that, then it would be ruined, because that would mean I was unilaterally just, proposing a solution and then getting people excited about it. And, and this is sexy idea. Oh, old ways like being used for new stuff. Oh, juxtaposition. You see that all the time, and it's always gammon.
It's always gammon.
You see things like, Aboriginal people using AI. An Aboriginal AI is being used to restore wetlands. It's like an Aboriginal AI. Oh, deadly. I want to see those Aboriginal coders. No, they're not coding. They've just got a few, Aboriginal co-managers just sort of following along with the scientists and the, land management, European land managers, who have an AI that basically, what does it do? It steers a drone or something, but the sexy headline, is like, oh, Aboriginal AI, and it's not Aboriginal AI. And then that they've got this, and it's brought back, it's restored these flocks of birds. They weren't there a couple of months ago, and now there's thousands of them. It's like what those migratory birds that come every year. Yeah. Those ones. Yeah, they weren't there last month because there was that different season. Now they're there. Well done, you. We've got outcomes. We've got this many units of bird that we've restored using this Aboriginal AI. And it's like, no, you didn't. But it doesn't matter. I mean, they get funding for that. I don't want to be sexy. I just want to go like, look, this works. There's some interesting stuff that comes out of there, out of this. We've got very interesting, out of the box ideas that happen. And when they're applied, they do interesting things. These are non-linear solutions that work from time to time, and it's worth exploring. So let's have a look at it. I did get funding for something like this years ago. I didn't personally get it, but I was at that 2020 summit, the Kevin Rudd one, at Parliament House years ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, and they put millions into this idea of Indigenous knowledge centers, this was what they were supposed to be doing,
Yeah.
but they ended up just being, Indigenous cultural displays. So, they were just cultural displays of this is Aboriginal culture. And, here's some of our deadly, successful Aboriginal businessmen and some interesting facts about their life. Or here's our Indigenous sporting heroes or country music legends, and, aren't they deadly? And that was it. I was like, so it's been a really hard concept to get across to people. And it still is, it's hard to get funding, but it'd be even harder to get government funding, and we'd have to be reporting on that all the time. We'd have to be reporting on it so often that we wouldn't be able to get the work done. So I'm like, no, stuff that we're going to get private donor funding, people who've got a bit of imagination and can actually see the pattern of things and, where things might go. So we're being a bit stubborn about that. And maybe it'll pay off and maybe it won't.
Oh, I hope it does.
Maybe in another 10 years, I'll still be going, I tried to do that thing and it never worked.
But you're already so out there. I've been your others podcasts, you're just hugely prolific in getting conversations like this out there in the world.
Well, it's because we're not trying to, we want to do, the idea is it's kind of like a think tank, but we're providing commentary in real time, to the things that are going on. It's not like, let's discuss that and then we'll start a research project and we'll apply for funding for 6 months and then we'll get the funding and then we'll do the ethics application and then we'll spend a year gathering the data and then we'll spend a year writing the paper and then we'll spend a year waiting for the journal to publish it. And that's too late. Yeah. There's no time for that, and COVID's changed the landscape. Operation Warp Speed, they pulled those vaccine together really fast because they were breaking the silos down and communicating. And, they figured out ways to make sure that the IPRs would stay with the mega rich. So it's fine. We're allowed to do that now. We're allowed to talk to each other because they figured out how to keep the IPRs in the hands of the powerful. So it's all good. So now that we're allowed to talk to each other before the research is finished, we're allowed to talk and publicly about things as we're ideating. It's we've got to do it, and we've got to do it in mediums that are improving on science's massive failure to do research translation for the public, because that's the biggest failure. That's where most of the problems we're experiencing right now, they're not just due to the excesses of a techno elite. Those excesses there'd be balances and checks if the public understood what was going on, if the public was scientifically literate. And you can only have that if you have constant, ongoing, entertaining, interesting research translation. And it has to be in the medium of whatever people are doing. So COVID, boom, podcasts explode. So you got to do podcasts. Yeah. I mean, it's eye rolling because everybody's doing a podcast now. And it's like, whatever, because everybody's listening to podcasts. So that's what we'll do until people shift to something else, and then we'll go to that medium. But basically, we have to be responding in real time and having these yarns, the research yarns that are happening before you've decided what you're going to research. And so you're being responsive. You're being responsive to the people who are listening, the people who are joining in with the yarns. And so it's more of a demotic, democratic kind of process in the first place, rather than these, geniuses in a tower somewhere bloody deciding what they're going to do for humanity and then researching that and then sharing it with 50 bloody boomer academics. The only people who'll ever read it, It's like, nah, get it out there. And even if you never do the research, you've still had that yarn, someone else might pick that up, or it might spark an idea out there. Not even might, it is. These things are happening all the time. I'm seeing some pretty amazing innovations coming out of, just seeds that have dropped from this process, huge innovations.
Yeah.
Pretty exciting stuff, like, even like down to even there was a climate scientist who contacted me and went, oh my God, I listened to these things, I read your book, and I've been sitting on this data for years trying to figure out how the hell to do the modeling and then how to present it, and it wouldn't go. And then I slept on it with this, with those thinking models, and then all of a sudden I've found out the solution and it works. And so that gets out there, and there are things like that. I get every day. I get messages from people. They've done bigger things than I've ever done. Just sparked from some of the seeds that get left behind from the yarns, that we have. It's not like coming out of me or anything. It's coming from the yarns, like, and just that approach to it. That idea of a process, that it has to be transparent, like right from the start. And then off you go.
And I think there's something in what you're saying, because I prepared all these notes and I haven't even looked at them at all in the conversation, because what you're saying is so true, because, when you're having a yarn conversation, it's how those ideas spark from each other. It could be a word, just a thought. And that's where I agree. So much innovation can happen,
we've had, like, recently we've come up with like just one of the sort of side projects we're doing. We've come up with like working on an algorithm that's coming out of a cultural structure. We're working on an algorithm that looks like it might be the solution to resolving like the biggest problem in genetic computing. And of that sort of stagnation after a few evolutions, as they do the Darwinian thing. We're proposing a different algorithm to the Darwinian model with the genetic computing thing. Once they get that right, and what if they get past that problem, then they're able to make the neural nets work better, and then they'll make massive advances in towards artificial general intelligence. So we've sort of come up with something that potentially could resolve that issue. The problem now is, though, that we have to, in the Aboriginal way, we can't just launch that on the world. That's like, no, we have accountabilities now. We've got to sit with that, and it's going to take a while to work through the protocols, but also to understand all of the potential externalities of that. I don't want that to result in bloody, some Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator bloody banging down my door. Like, nobody wants that. No one wants Skynet. So we got to think through it a little bit, not a little bit. I mean, we have to be very, very rigorous. The ethics side of Indigenous knowledge is massive, but there are things we can solve. There are problems we can solve, and but then also it's our method, whereby things do have to go slow. If you have the idea to make a gene editing technology, well, possibly you could create that within 5 years, but it's probably more like 50 years of sitting down and figuring out how to, control for all the externalities of that and what you need to put in place. You need a system in place, to make sure that existential threat isn't just released on the world,
There's one more thing I was thinking about a lot, was the whole discussion you made about the dot, and how, the dot is like the atom, but it's also the universe. And it called to mind the Māori expression of te kore, or the void, which is like the void, it's emptiness, but it's also everything and potentiality. And I just think, what you were just saying about sitting with an idea, sitting with a thought, it's that being able to look at things from what the minutiae is to the expanded universality of the potential of it. We'd love.
You could get there, but that's, that's a few stages down the track. First of all, you've got to you've got to just get right the basic relationship that symbol's referring to, which is mother-child, you know. And until you have the mother-child relation right, you know, in your society or in your community, and until that relation is the center of all things in your community and is honored and protected and rewarded and valued and is the center of everything, where all things come into that and all things come out of that, you know, that's that creative space. That's creation right there. That mother-child is the center of everything. And you get that right first.
Yeah.
And then you can start getting all celestial about it. Before you start going into the microverse of atoms and going out to the macroverse of bloody, you know, galaxies and such, just, you know, say hi to your mum.
It's really not. That's so true,
Yeah.
you know, because it really
is
about that, isn't it? And I remember you talking on one of your podcasts about how that was also a problem in our modernity, in our urban environments, that there's been this annihilation of the mother and erasure of the mother and the child.
Well, it's a perfect way to track your externalities. You know what I mean? You should never intervene unless you know what the externalities are. And how do you begin to imagine that? Well, you do really well just to say, what's the impact of this on mothers and children?
Yeah.
You know, because frickin' 99% of the time, all of the externalities from, you know, extraction and technological innovation, all of the externalities there, that mess is cleaned up by women. Mothers and women are the unpaid workers who have to mop up the overspill, the toxic overspill of this poxy civilization. And they've had to do that for bloody, you know, a few centuries in some places, a few millennia in other places, you know. And thus it's always been for as long as that civilization has been running, you know, since they first put together the code of Hammurabi's law in Sumeria, you know, that was the start of it. That was the start of it. You know, they did figure out a way to weaponize spirituality and turn it into a big monotheistic religion that they could use to ensure all of their merchants' contracts and trade and all that sort of thing, which is cool. But then there was a whole heap of externalities and violences and messes and destroyed environments and toxic relations and toxic substances. And every bit of it, you know, came back to the mother. That she had to try and clean that up and deal with that, with a life that was no longer a life and that was no longer valued, that was no longer rewarded. You know, that's it. The mother is always bears the brunt of the externalities. So if you want to look for where they're going to go, have a look and see how it's going to impact women and mothers and children. And then you go from there. You can pretty much usually track out every single one, especially if you include the concept of the land as a mother as well.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think we're probably coming to a close because I can hear your kids needing a bit of attention. But yeah, look, I could actually just talk to you for ages because it's so interesting, you know, your provoking thoughts and you know, your insights into things. Just to close.
And my staggering hypocrisy here while I'm talking about the importance of women and children while I'm ignoring my kids.
Yeah, what do they call that?
To do an interview on a machine that's made out of rare earth metals dripping with the blood of Africa, you know? Yeah.
What do they call
I'm
that?
awesome. I'm fabulous. I have a special relationship with the land.
What's it?
Special my cheeks.
Yeah, cognitive dissonance, I think that is. Yeah, but, you know, that's the world we live in, isn't it? It's really, you know, I think if we actually try to take in all the impacts that are affecting us in our lives at the same time, you know, you probably, you know, want to top yourself. So I think you have to somehow navigate that and deal with things. Yeah. So
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's just why we were saying all that stuff. Mama arrived back home.
Yeah, so you need to need to
So
go and
it's
do family stuff now. Look, thank you
yeah,
so
yeah.
much for your
She
time.
needs me. Bubbies need me, and you gotta walk your talk. Otherwise, what are you? Nothing.
Look, it's been really great talking to you, Tyson, and
Yeah, same way.
yeah, really enjoyed it. And good luck with everything. And I'm sure to be listening to one of your podcasts again soon.
Sweet.
Cool. See you
Well, hope
later.
to talk again soon. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.